If it weren't for prayer, there would be no opportunity for confession. If it weren't for prayer, there would be no opportunity for salvation. If it were not for prayer, there would be no reconciliation. If it were not for prayer, there would be no sanctification. And as Buber, the great theologian, said, if it weren't for prayer, there would be no I-thou relationship, and therefore no basis for even theology. That part which helps us to better understand and know God. But you know, people have always recognized the need for prayer. In the Gospel of Luke, that's not where you need to turn. You need to be in Matthew's Gospel. I'm hoping you're looking at your outline. You're looking at the text. It's in Matthew 6 this morning, beginning in verse 5. But I'm going to encourage you to know that this is in what we call the synoptic tradition. Those books, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, laid side by side, where you can see somewhat the same thing being said over and over again. And if the problem is correct, Mark wrote first, and except for 66 verses in the Gospel of Mark, every single verse in Mark is duplicated word for word by either Matthew or by Luke. And so when it comes to prayer, and it comes to the prayer we're looking at in Matthew's Gospel, in Luke's Gospel it has a little different introduction. He says that the disciples, having witnessed the prayer of Jesus, he was praying and the prayer was over, and they said, Lord, teach us, I want you to listen to that, teach us to pray the way John taught his disciples to pray. Now, it isn't just we see them praying and we want to pray like that, because some of those guys had been John's disciples. And there was something uniquely and different about Jesus and his prayer life. They'd seen the lame walk. They'd seen the dumb speak, the deaf hear. They had seen demons cast out. They had seen the natural phenomena of a sea that was stirred to its peak, completely calm, because he simply prayed before God and said, peace, be still. And so, after he had finished praying, they said, Lord, teach us to pray. In your text today, in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 6, beginning in verse 5, you have what each of the Gospel writers did, a very orderly and laid out form of presentation. Whether they were following it exactly what they heard from the Lord, or they took what they heard from the Lord and put it in a written form. You have an introduction. You have 7 petitions, and then if you take a lot of what's been added in there, you have what I would call a conclusion. And so with that, this morning, we come to 4 words of instruction in prayer. Lord, teach us to pray, and he's really telling them 4 things in all of this prayer model that he gives us that you need to do. So notice, as we begin reading, it says, and when you pray, it's in what color? And so that means who's saying it? Jesus. So is it up to you whether you do this or not? No. Now, you can usurp the will of God for your life and not do it, but if Jesus says when you pray, he doesn't only mean that you should pray, he means that you should always be praying. It ought to be a part of your life. If you are a believer, you ought to pray, so when you are praying, he's assuming that. He said, so when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites. Now, we always like to take our finger and, I know those folks. And if you come to church, you have folks point that finger at you. Why don't you come and worship with us? Because of hypocrites just like you. We don't want to go down there. Of course, I want to encourage you to encourage them. Just tell them, say, listen, friend, we are hypocrites. Come on and join us. One more won't hurt. Just invite them. And get them to understand if a hypocrite is standing between them and relationship with the Lord, guess who's closer to the Lord? The hypocrite is. Right? And so when you pray, don't pray like the hypocrites, that Greek word which means actor. Don't put on a show. Don't be something you're not. When you pray, it calls for genuineness, doesn't it? And after all, God, I don't really think hears your words. I know this may sound crazy. He hears your heart. You know, it wouldn't matter if you prayed in English or Chinese or Japanese or German or any other language we could stand up here and name. God hears the heart of the person when they pray. And so he says, don't be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. And he realizes there's a problem with prayer because there are people who call themselves people of God who display false religious faith. And they were standing in public and they were praying and they were making a show of things. Sometimes we do that in the way we try to pray in public. We want people to be impressed. And more than that, listen, church, I want you to hear that. More than that, there are people who won't pray because they're terrified of being embarrassed when in their head they think of what others think if they heard them pray. All you have to do is talk to God just like you do to anyone else you speak to. Because after all, He only hears what's in your heart. And so it says, for they love to pray. They like how people look at them and how they feel about themselves and what they think people think about them when they hear them pray these great prayers. Oh, brother, man, that was a great, you could sure pray, brother. I want to tell you what, every single one of us can pray. And what you have to say is no less significant and important to the heart of your loving Father than anybody else's prayer. We need to wash and cleanse ourselves of a lot of this false and negative thinking and get back to being a people of prayer. And Jesus said they think that they have great standing because of how they pray in public places and on the corners to be seen of others. And Jesus says, truly, He says, it's for a fact, you can take it to the bank. I tell you, they have received their reward in full. Now, don't run that too far down the road. It means that they've got all they're going to get. That's what it means. You know, and so that's it. But in contrast, a strong conjunction, shifting the whole idea of what he's saying. But when you pray, go into your room. Now, we've just finished with a great movie that came out here. I know a lot of us saw it, called The War Room. And the lady went in and she had a closet and she had stuff stuck up all over the place in the closet. And, you know, and even that sometimes causes us to do the wrong stuff. We don't have to do it the way she did it. It just means, folks, you need to have some things you keep ever before you and you keep before God. And I think the best reason to write them down is because you forget what you pray, just like I do. And you forget who and what to pray for if you don't have some list. But write that down. Put it before God and do it alone. Somewhere where you're not distracted. Guys, you can't go home this afternoon and have prayer time while you watch professional football. And you can't do like some of us preachers do, try to study in between the quarters. And I guarantee you we do it. I know it. And so, you know, be specific about your prayer. Go in, and actually, if you look in the text here, what this is, in most of the homes, there was a room where they stored the things that were precious, and the most precious things to them were their food and things of that nature. And that was the only room in the house that had a lock on it. So go somewhere where nobody else is, that's concealed and private. Everywhere that place is. You know, I've had some great prayer times sitting on the beach out here. There's enough noise coming off the water, it shuts everybody else out. And, you know, you can just get along with the Lord. Or you can go up on a mountaintop and get someplace where you're by yourself. Or if you can't do any of those, and you don't have the luxury of that on those small times, at least in my life, I'm able to do that, then find you somewhere of solitude and get alone and pray. Get alone and pray. He says, so go into that room, close the door, and maybe shut everything and everybody else out and pray to your Father who is in heaven, and He is, of course, unseen. And then your Father who sees what is done in secret. It's not about anything or anybody else. It's about the concern of the prayer before God. And when all of that is made right, he says, then the Father who is unseen, He will see to it that what is done in secret will be rewarded, and the implication is in the open. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like the pagans. Because you see, they thought that by their much babbling and talking, they would be heard. For they think they will be heard instead because of their many words. Listen, friend, you cannot coerce God. He will not jump through your hoop. You can't create a magical formula out of the text and say, now, act. He is sovereign. He does what He wants to do when it needs to be done. And you and I ought to be happy about that. I'm very thankful that God did not answer a lot of my prayers when I wanted them answered. And I'm glad He answered a lot of my prayers when I didn't think He would answer them. And so He says, do not be like them, for your Father. Now, if you get a highlighter or a pencil, or there's a pencil in the pew or a pen, and underline this and put stars all around it. Verse 8, notice what it says. Do not be like them. That would basically be people who have false ways and false thoughts about what prayer is and how it ought to work. Don't be like them. What does He say? For your Father knows what you need before you ask Him. Oh, now I love some of you then. So why should I even ask if He already knows what I'm going to ask? Because you need to. He wouldn't have told you if you didn't need to. You know, I'll take you into, I'm go back to one of my other old stories I really love. I used to just laugh. There was this saying, says, you know, the old Pentecostal lady, man, I'm not making fun of the Pentecostals, okay? If you're in here and you're one of those that set that aside, that's not what I'm saying. But the lady said, thank God, she was praising and she was praying. Thank God I'm ignorant. And I'm getting more ignorant every day. And even from Alabama, I knew that was bad grammar. You know, and I would laugh, and we would talk, and we would laugh. And then guess what happened? One day, I realized she was absolutely 100% right. I'm telling you, if you know somebody has some education, I got a little. The one thing I can tell you I know is I don't know much. I don't know much. And I remember my pastor as a young man in the ministry, he took his crude, and I like this because I have the same kind of crude ability and artistic gifts, and he drew a little candle and he put some rays around it. And he said, Greg, I want you to look at this picture. He says, the bigger the light, the bigger the sphere of darkness around it. And what you'll know, if you meet a person who's really honest and's got integrity when it comes to education and knowledge, they'll be this way. You know, the more you know, the more you know you don't know. And I'm telling you, it dwarfs you. And you say, well, why learn? Why even try? Well, I'll tell you why, because God said to. Study to show yourself approved unto God. Oh, that means work at it. Study to show yourself approved unto God, a workman that doesn't need to be ashamed when it comes to cutting the edge of truth straight. We need more people that will be willing to apply themselves to the Word of God and understand what it says and what it teaches so that we can declare the truth. Be able to give a defense for the faith that's in you. Folks, there's some things we need to hear and change in our thinking, and we need to get rid of our puffed up pride. And so if it doesn't do any good, the closer you get to God only to find that you are further away, then why even attempt? I want to tell you what, that's eternity. You think about it, that's eternity. No matter how far you journey, no matter what you know, what you learn, God is inexhaustible. His truths are inexhaustible. His blessing for your life is inexhaustible. And when you pray, no matter how close you get to Him, you can never be totally where He is because He is above and beyond us. He is the holy other. And would you want a God any less? And so when you pray, remember these things. This then is how you should pray. Now, I'm going to give you a test, and you're going to probably flunk like the first group did. All right? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. I would say most of us think we just prayed. You know what you just did? You recited a model, an outline. Now, I'm going to do something else all of you wished I would do, but I'm not going to. Okay? The living word. 4 words of instruction on prayer. Matthew 6, 5 through 15. Introduction is that thing in Luke, a model prayer. This is how we ought to pray. Private before public. Public, private, all its subpoints. Sincerity before ceremony. Right heart, right ritual. Will before want. Its subpoints. Forgiving before forgiven. And its subpoints. Amen. Let's go home. Now, if you get up and leave, I am going to haunt you. Okay, what am I talking about? I mean, you would never think the sermon is just the printed outline. So why do you think the model for praying is the prayer? It has been drummed into us. We have practiced it. We have recited it. And yet what I want to tell you today is He's given us 4 instructions about praying while using the model Christ has given. And that's what I want you to see today. So go with me to the first. Private before public. What does it mean to pray public? It means that a lot of times people pray because they want to be heard. Who do they ask to pray? The people they think are the best prayers. Who are the best prayers? I'm telling you, most folks don't know. Now listen to me. Who prays the best? Most folks don't know. I'll tell you what, you get on one of these prayer trains, one of these little ladies that you don't even know their name. I tell you what, they've got the ear of God. And if you were looking for the person who prayed best, that'd be the person you'd want. But you know who you want? You want that pastor. You want that deacon, that one who when they pray, oh man, it just sounds like they're talking directly to God. And we like it, and they like us liking it. And that's it. We walk out of here with nothing. We already got it. God wants to hear from every one of us. Because we're His children, He is concerned about what's going on with us. And so, in public prayer, we often have a tendency to believe it's the person who everybody has sanctioned as a good prayer to pray. Now, I'm going to tell you what, there are some public folks that I'd like to have praying for me. I would never not want Billy Graham to pray for me. Would you? Isn't that great to have Billy Graham pray for you? And, then I think about babblers and beggars. There are folks who think that people who go on and on and on and can just spin phrase after phrase after phrase, and in that prayer phrase, alliteration after alliteration after alliteration, think that they're great prayer. Or if you get in a prayer group, that person who just can just endlessly pray. And do you remember Mount Carmel? Do you remember the prophets of Baal? They prayed how long? All day, all the way up to lunch. They cut themselves. They did all this kind of stuff. Did anything happen? Yeah, it did. They bled all over the place. And then in less than 30 seconds, Elijah prays, fire falls from heaven, consumes the altar, the sacrifice, licks every bit of it up. It isn't the length of the prayer. It isn't the multiple words of the prayer. It's the heart of the prayer. That's where all that you are and all that I am comes together, and we make that petition known to God. And sometimes it's not even words. I love Joyce Landorf in her great book, Silent September. She says, pain is a language without words. Is it any wonder that my prayers for you are often wordless too and shaped like tears? Wow. I can remember how that touched me the first time I read that. Pain is a language without words. And so when I pray about pain for you, it's not in words. I just go to God with what I know because I've been there. And He hears and He answers. Wow. And so it's not babbling. It's not begging. You can't coerce God. You can't make Him jump through your biblical, theological, developed hoop. Okay? He's sovereign. He acts when and how He chooses. But it's private prayer. It's going to that place. It's getting away from the distractions, concerns of the world, and allowing God to do His work. And primarily, that word prayer comes in the Greek word to petition God. You pray to a God who already knows what you need before you ask Him. You pray with that kind of confidence? Knowing. Not doubting, not suspecting, maybe if, because that opens the door for the evil one to say, well, if you go to church a little bit more, get a bit more money, you pray, read your Bible a little bit more, get more consistent on your daily Bible. All these things we think are going to somehow coerce God. Friend, you just got to be upfront honest. He already knows. Sincerity before ceremony. You got to have a right heart. James 4:3 says the reason you don't get what you ask for is because your motive is wrong. We catch a lot of bad press in the Baptist church about, if it be your will. Well, friend, I want you to know you don't want a prayer answered if it's not God's will. But at the same time, their critique is not totally wrong, because sometimes we pass off our responsibility with a disclaimer, if it be your will. See, it's not the words, it's the motive of the heart. And so he says, right heart, then you'll have the right ritual. A ritual is a ceremony according to a prescribed order. And the Lord's Prayer is a prescribed order for a model prayer. But the prayer is no better than the heart of the person that's praying it. Will before want. His will be done. Absolutely. It's not us getting our will done by God on earth. It's us getting our hearts right so that what is done on earth is the same thing as what's being done in heaven. Do you think there's an angelic being in heaven that doesn't understand that? And we need to understand that and get that done. Our need. Give us three things: food, forgiveness, and freedom. And they come in that way. You're not going to pray about much or do much if you don't have what you need physically. It's kind of like Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If that survival part, it's the hypotenuse of the triangle. If that's not being met, that's going to be your total focus, almost. But, we live with a God who lived in a world where a lot of that wasn't done. Most of the folks in the first century never knew what it's like to have a full stomach once. And yet he causes us to be fully actuated. Self-actualization at the top, even though the bottom may be minused. But he says, give us what we need: our sustenance, roof over our head, food in our mouth, clothes on our back. Forgive us. Because you see, we're at a disconnect. We can't be in right relationship with God if that barrier is broken by sinfulness. And a part of that sinfulness is not forgiving those who need us to forgive them. Friend, if there's unforgiveness in your life and in your heart, you're the one on the hook. It's not a this for that. If I don't forgive, God's not going to forgive me. He's not like that. He's just simply saying, if you've truly experienced transformational forgiveness and life change, you're going to have that same disposition toward those who have hurt you, just like your sin and my sin hurt him and put him on the cross. And when that comes, you'll have freedom. You'll walk in peace that passes all understanding. Forgiving before forgiven. Forgiving means looking up and seeing, like the unforgiving servant never saw, that your debt is beyond anything you could ever pay. And his forgiveness is beyond any grace you could ever imagine. And if that has occurred, you ought to behave that way toward others. If that has occurred, you will behave that way toward others. Now, sometimes it takes us a bit of time to get there. But God's grace is sufficient, and he'll help us. Pray. Does prayer work? It's been about 6 years ago. It was the very first night in the summer that it actually got cool enough to put the top down on our convertible. We'd just been on a trip to Honduras working with the orphans over there. It was my son's birthday, so that would have been, it was right around the 25th of August. Y'all been here in August before? Now, for some of you northern folks, you may not understand, there are times when you don't put the top down because it's too hot, especially if you have an air conditioner. So it was the first night we could put the top down, and it was so nice. It was about 80, and we were driving home, and we went over Hathaway Bridge, and just as we crested the bridge, I looked over and I said to my wife, "We're so blessed." We were just so enjoying. That was something we had longed for all these years, and said, "We're just so blessed." And she was yes, and we came off of the top of the bridge and came right down there to the traffic light under the flyover, where Thomas turns, or you turn off of 98 on Thomas or go straight on 98, and we're sitting there. And we started talking about it again. In fact, I kind of turned and I was talking to her, and all of a sudden I heard this terrible racket. I thought, man, somebody just got clobbered. It was us. A drunk driver who, when he finally got to Bay Medical and they tested him, was .33. Hit us going somewhere between 45 and 50 miles an hour. We were sitting dead still. He never put on his brakes. Okay, bad wreck. Messed up the car. Did some physical mess to my wife and to me. But I'll tell you that to tell you this. 3 minutes, because when we went over the bridge, we looked at the time. 3 minutes before it occurred, Kathy's mother got this impression, this sense. I really need to pray for Greg and Kathy. She had no clue. She just said, Father, I just pray that you'd send your holy angels, your guardian angels, to come and protect them. And I'm sure her prayer probably took at least as long as it took us to get there and get hit. Now, after the lick occurred, and you have that kind of, euphoric peace, and all that stuff goes on, it's amazing how things can change, and what's happening so quick just slows down to a methodically close, just slow process. The first thing I hear is Kathy screaming. And she had a terrible lick because of the seat belt across her abdomen area. And she was hurt. We didn't know how bad. I didn't seem to be hurt. And I was sitting there, and I started to react, and I thought, no. Check everything first. Be sure nothing was broke, nothing was bleeding. Be sure the car wasn't on fire. I could see some smoke. Checked everything out, and when I kind of got everything settled down, I reached over and unsnapped her safety belt to relieve the pressure off of her. And then I opened the door and got out, and I looked, and you're still kind of in a surreal place. You can't believe it's occurred. And I went around, got her door open. Someone was there. They had seen the accident. The ambulance was already on the way. And so it was over. And they're loading Kathy up into the ambulance, and they're wanting to know what I'm going to do. I said, well, I'm going to ride with her. I mean, obviously, I can't drive my car, And we're going to pay you $1,400. You're going to take me to the hospital, And so anyway, all that's going on. But I said, wait a minute, because I knew they were going to take the car. I sat back down in the car, cranked the engine, put the convertible top up, and rolled up the windows. There was no back end of the car. But the fuselage, the area where you sit, not a glass was broken, and everything was intact. God answers prayer. The problem, folks, is we don't pray. We don't listen when He sensitizes us. We don't engage there first. We do all this other peripheral stuff. And what I'm simply saying this morning, church, let's become a people of prayer. Let's see what God can do in the life of our church and in the life of the Christian community and in our individual lives, because we truly believe in prayer. Pray with me. Father, today, thank you for loving